we've been looking, I think many of us have been looking forward to this presentation. Often over these last months, you've spoken about the three great syntheses. We've just completed Thanksgiving on the threshold of the first Thanksgiving 2020. So this is very timely, and your presentation, I think, speaks in particular to our striving together in perhaps an aspect of the third great synthesis. So we're looking forward to hearing from you. And then, as mentioned, Patricia will pick up her thread at the conclusion. So welcome, Connie and Andrew.
Hello, Stuart. Hello, friends.
Hello, hello. We're thrilled to be here. And what we're going to do is we look at it from an eagle's perspective, the high perspective of providential history, if you have it. The evolution of consciousness of humanity is our perspective that we're bringing to this conversation, and it is our life's work, is to contribute to the evolution of consciousness in any way we can, and what we've seen and what we know in our life's journey, and was probably our divine purpose of being here. Primarily, my focus is on the role of Indigenous people and the role they've played in the evolution of consciousness and have yet to play, because they aren't recognized for the role they have played and have yet to play. And I saw that 30 years ago, that what was next in the evolution of consciousness is that we will come to understand what the Indigenous peoples know about the nature of the universe. Okay, so, and this is what Patricia is bringing to us, is this knowledge of the nature of the universe through her teachings, her knowledge, her ancestral knowledge, and her ability to translate it for our use in our evolutionary process. And we're very aligned, we're very complementary with Patricia. We have a different articulation of it in some instances, but and we'll be sharing a lot of that with our trust frequency work on Saturday. But right now, we're going to present the evolution of consciousness from basically from the Magna Carta up through what we see coming in the future. Would you like to say something, Andrew? Can everybody go on mute who's not on mute?
Yeah, whatever that was really loud at our end.
Everybody mute, please.
Thank you. So my orientation is very similar to Connie's, except I articulated it slightly differently. My primary interest, and it breaks down into a number of categories that look separate but are not. Homo sapiens, what does that mean? So Homo is this genus of which we are a part, and sapiens is the species of which we are allegedly a part. And sapiens means either intelligent or wise. And I'm really asking the question, are we actually an intelligent species? Is there actually intelligent life on Earth? Which is an interesting question if you just look at it from that standpoint. Because in some ways we're absolutely amazing. We are just genius, we are angelic, we're astonishing. And the opposite pertains as well. So looking at that with just no judgment, this is the species of which I am a member, of which I am a part, and to be studying myself, us in the context. So just to take one very obvious example, we've come 400 years down this American path, and I sailed across the Atlantic exactly 50 years ago and landed here on Thanksgiving of 1969. And America is the hope of the world, or was the hope of the world, and it may once again be the hope of the world. Right now, it's the despair of much of the world. And that's interesting. And just to face things with honesty and frankness and non-judgmentally see reality for what it is. So we are an evolving species. We may be on the right path. It's entirely possible. Connie would say we absolutely are on the right path. It's true that if you approach it from the highest possible perspective, it's impossible to be anything other than being on the right path. Got it. but there's these boots on the ground factors that are significant, and the conversations that I've had glimpses of with that you friends here are examining, for example, the economic system, the financial system, and how it has basically in many ways divided us. And is that sapient? Is that a sapient thing to do? Question. So I'm really just looking at this stage of my life, I'm looking at all of reality from the standpoint of just a non-judgmental observer to see what it is we have going on here, and to see where I personally and us as a community may be able to engage in ways that have at least some chance of success, of actual coming up with a, shall we say, a proposal or a plan, and enacting that plan. Can we do that? Is that even possible? Can we bridge the divide?
Yeah, and so that's his perspective. We have quite different perspectives on that, because from my perspective, we are coming together. The four races of man are coming together. This whole breakdown has to do with the fact that none of our systems have been aligned with universal law, which Patricia would agree with. She may say it in different words, but we haven't been aligned with universal law. And so everything is breaking down because we're moving through. Out of the ashes rises the phoenix. We're moving into alignment with our hearts, with our whole brain thinking, with what Patricia is guiding us to. So that's a given for me. So meanwhile, we will go on.
And that was a restatement of what I just said.
Yeah.
I don't know if you realize that.
So
you see, they're apparently different perspectives.
Okay.
Okay.
So meanwhile, we have some a PowerPoint that we put together actually a couple of years ago on this subject, and it was entitled "Good News About the First Thanksgiving." It was given at the Boulder City Club in 2015, and we'd just like to go through that process, and and so we'll start. We're going to share our screen. So a significant event in the evolution of the free mind, okay? And what Native Indigenous ways are about is the free mind, freedom of conscience, freedom to act according to our direct connection. And this is what the Mayflower Pilgrims were all about as well. So here we go. This is a fun little, just a funny thing, the truth at last. So we've got a
that's Batman.
Batman and Thanksgiving.
All right.
So anyway, this is just a little joke. The truth at last. Okay, next slide. The Batman Thanksgiving. Next slide.
We like to interject a little humor from time to time.
Bill, next slide.
Yeah, there's a slight delay.
Okay.
Okay.
Can you see us, Bill, if I just give you a...
Yeah, I can see you. So if you want to just do a little thing, yeah,
I'll do that.
that'll work. That'll work well.
Okay, so we're looking at the big picture, the transformation of consciousness, the evolutionary upward spiral. We believe that humanity is an evolutionary upward spiral, and that there is, for me personally, there is only the coming of peace on earth and heaven on earth, and we have to choose this through our free will. Okay, and everything that's happening in the world is happening to get us to choose it. It's all collapsing, the climate crisis, everything is taking us into our hearts, because we love those polar bears, those polar bears sitting on that little bit of ice, and every tree in the Amazon that goes down, it hurts because we realize that our systems don't work and that we have to do something else. And so that it's through inspiration that we're going to reconnect with ourselves, and through the guidance of people like Patricia and Kevin Deere and other visionary Native people who are willing to share how to get back to alignment with our true nature. And so we have the trust frequency, our book, The Trust Frequency, which we're talking about on Sunday. And it has to do with creator-based, providence-based philosophies, understandings of the nature of the universe. So do you have anything you want to say on that? matter, Andrew?
No, I'm with you.
He's
Yeah,
with
we'll
me.
step to the
Okay,
right. Yeah.
let's move it along. Okay, so do you want to talk about any of this? Do you have your glasses on? Can you read it?
I can, but I can put them on if I need to.
Okay, do you want to talk about any of that, or do you want me
On
to?
the same slide, babe?
No, it's a new slide.
Is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, so this slide is headlined, entitled The United States of America, which is an interesting 400-year-old, next year, 400 years since the arrival of the Mayflower, and 2007 would have been the 400th anniversary of Jamestown. So there's been this, certainly from the English standpoint, there's been this experiment in North America that has become the United States of America. And of course, there was a French influence with New France, and part of that continues to this day in Canada. And there's all of the Spanish-speaking countries to the south of us that started as much as 100 years earlier, long before the Mayflower. Of course, we had Columbus, and there's so much confusion I find with Americans. Really don't know the difference between the Mayflower and whatever
The Pinto and the Santa Maria.
You know, they came on the Mayflower, didn't they? And oh right, and on the Pinto, what were the other boats' names? And right, it was the captain was a guy named Columbus. Right. I mean, honestly,
It's crazy, the conflation.
there's simply a huge amount of misunderstanding, misbelief, and some of that misunderstanding and misbelief is actually vibrationally affects the nature of the way Americans understand their country. So part of this work, as I see it, is to set the record straight, because many of the things in those early days were actually extraordinarily positive. Humans encountered each other and learned to speak each other's languages, and
Yeah,
they
we'll-
actually.
We'll get on with that. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, but go on.
So.
But we'll proceed with that. But yeah, just
Okay,
finish.
so continue.
Yeah,
Pick it up.
yeah.
Go ahead.
Anyway, so, okay, yeah, because we're going to move into that. But what America stands for, and the true American dream has been co-opted by basically what we feel is the misinformation about the nature of the universe, our belief in scarcity, so which leads to greed and all that behavior that has taken the American dream of liberty, justice, abundance, and freedom, liberty and freedom and equality for all, and has taken it and twisted it into the situation we have now. But so in the 1600s, what happened? You switched it, Bill.
Can you go back one, Bill? What was it? Back to the United States of America. I guess you waved your hands and he thought you were indicating to.
Yeah.
There you
Okay.
go.
So anyway, what we have here in the United States is the consent of the governed. You know, the essence of the American dream is the consent of the governed, the self-determination, the separation of church and state, the equal and just laws serving the common good, liberty, justice, and abundance for all. And what we're saying is that the Mayflower Pilgrims brought those visions to this land, and they met with the Native Americans who had those visions, and there was this 54 years of intercultural synthesis that brought forth what we call now the United States of America. So you can switch it now, Bill.
There we go. Thank you.
Yeah. So why don't you do this one for sure?
All right. Put my glasses on and read it. All right. So the 1600s, a radical shift in consciousness. A bifurcation occurs. And what that refers to is actually the bifurcation in Europe, in the European mindset, which took us in the direction through Newton and Descartes and then Darwin, took us in the direction of the scientific, so-called scientific, rational, materialist paradigm, which was a total bifurcation, a fork in the path, away from what had existed prior. And what had existed prior to that was actually sort of pretty much defined by the church, by Catholicism, by Rome, And so we had this God, Jesus, European paradigm that then was suddenly challenged by these extraordinary thinkers, these really, really wonderful thinkers who literally changed everything. And yet they brought to us a rather bleak reality. They brought to us a reality. Descartes, for example, says if you can't see it, if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. And of course, religion and spirituality and mysticism and metaphysics all agree that there is a huge amount of the universe that we can't detect. We can detect sometimes in the scientific sense, but we can't actually touch it. We can't see it. We can feel the effects of electricity, but we can't actually see it with our eyes. We can measure it with our instruments. So a bifurcation, a fork in the road occurred that has profoundly influenced current society. We're several hundred years into that shift right now. And while rational science has brought a huge amount to humanity, at the same time, a great deal has been lost. And so what I find very interesting is to ask the question, what is it that we Westerners, or it's not just Westerners, because the Chinese and the Indians and the Japanese are they're very much bought into that very Eurogenetic philosophy. They have totally bought it lock, stock, and barrel. And so really the question is, who still remembers reality? Who still remembers the big truth? Who still is able to see that in combination with the scientific reality? And I think the answer to that has to be the indigenous peoples of the world, not just in Native America, but the Bushmen of the Kalahari, the Aborigines of Australia, the people of the jungles of the Amazon, and on and on and on. The closer one is to the old way, the better chance I think perhaps one has of remembering something that perhaps we have forgotten. My culture, the culture I was raised in, has forgotten.
Right. And in the late 1500s, the Bible was translated into English. So this is another radical shift because the church was dominating the people. In England, the church was the church and state were one. There was absolute monarchy there, and you had to go to church and believe what the church had to tell you. So this is another situation where a bifurcation occurred, where the separatists separated from the Church of England, and the separatists are the ones who became the Pilgrims, the Mayflower Pilgrims, different from the Puritans. The separatists knew they had to separate from the Church of England, which was a treasonous act, and they knew that you couldn't just purify the church. So they knew that we were intended to relate directly to the divine, epiphany-based direct connection, which is Native American, which is indigenous, that we listen, we watch the signs, we listen, and we act accordingly because we're connected to our conscience, which is our direct connection to the divine. And so that's where the inspiration leads us to live a spirit-guided life. I don't know how many of you people there feel that you live a spirit-guided life. You listen to your inner promptings, you listen to your heart, and you act accordingly. That's what the Mayflower Pilgrims saw and put their lives on the line because they believed that humanity had this inherent right to do this. And this is our true nature. And to me, this is where we're headed. And this is what's carried in the indigenous ways. So that's that for now on that 1600s piece.
Yeah, that's enough of that.
That's enough of that for this
Okay,
piece.
that's
So
it.
let's move on to the
Let's
next
shift from
next slide. Bill?
Sorry about the delay. Yeah,
That's okay.
there's a little delay.
Yeah, thank you.
So this direct connection to the divine, yeah, here's the process that the separatists went through. So you can read it here. it was a treasonous act, and I hope you understand the difference between the Puritans and the separatists. The Puritans wanted to purify the Church of England. The separatists knew they couldn't do that. They had to separate from it, which was a treasonous act. They had to meet in secret in the Scrooby Manor in Scrooby, England, where we've been there. And we have a little film on YouTube of me speaking about all this in front of Scrooby Manor, where they actually met. William Brewster's father worked there for the Queen. It's all very exciting, dramatic story of what these pilgrims in alignment with their hearts knew they had to do for humanity. So this was a huge step in the evolution of consciousness. So they escaped from England. It was against the law to leave England. They had to escape from England, and they were actually arrested. They were on a boat. They were betrayed by the boat owner. They were arrested and put in jail after they'd sold all their worldly possessions to do this thing. And they were put in jail. And then several months later, they, or even a couple of years later, I don't know how much later, they finally did get to Holland, where there was religious freedom. And religious freedom meaning that they could practice any way they wanted to, and they had their own way of coming together and worshiping. So they were in Leiden, Holland, for 12 years, and then they while they were in Holland, they had to be in a lower class. It was a guild system, and they could only be workers. They couldn't be pastors and contributory members of the community in that way. But they did lecture at the university and did various things. But their work had to be in these menial tasks. And so there was a treaty with Spain that was about to be over, and Catholicism might be coming back to Holland, and their kids were turning Dutch. They wanted their kids to be English. And so that's when they decided to head out across the sea.
And that's a long and complex story, and I think we should not go into that right now, just, the adventures and the storms and all of those details.
No.
So long story short, they end up arriving in Massachusetts.
Here's the covenant. One thing, what I didn't, I wanted to.
By the way, there really is a town called Scrooby in England. It has nothing to do with Scrooby-Doo.
Okay. So the Scrooby Covenant, you can take it to there, Bill. So one thing we want to show you, because this is really a key articulation.
It's their manifesto.
Their manifesto, that they were going to walk in alignment with all of the Lord's ways that they saw in the Bible, and that were made known to them and had yet to be made known to them. They weren't saying that they knew everything, okay? They were going out into this adventure knowing that things were going to be revealed to them. And it says, according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them. So they were ready to put their lives on the line for this understanding. It's really extraordinary who these people were.
Can you imagine people making this kind of commitment of their lives and their wives and their children to this brand new belief system? It was just beginning to unfold. It was an evolution of the understanding, literally, of the nature of the universe as seen through a very Christian lens, to, which has God and the Holy Spirit and Jesus, and yet completely different from the way Rome had articulated, completely different from the way Henry VIII and the Church of England had articulated it. And it was the very beginning of a whole new type of freedom, really. It was a breaking away from the old rigid structures of power. And the freedom, the Mayflower literally delivered the seeds of democracy across the Atlantic, where they took root.
So what I feel is, as soon as the Native Americans find out who these people really were and what they stood for, they're going to discover an ally, a leader, an ally in everything that they have been holding on to for humanity. They're going to say, oh my goodness, these people, they wanted that too. Okay, I mean, it's astounding what they did. There's such an alliance of spirituality between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans, and that's what we're pointing out. And so, and we've been in Scrooby, we've been in Cambridge, England, we've been in Scrooby, we've been in Leiden. We wanted to be sure, I wanted to be sure before I opened my mouth on this, that I knew who these people were, okay, and what their intent was. Okay, so this is original research. This is source material that we have experienced, we've seen, we've read, we've done this work because we want to be bringing the truth to the best extent possible we can. And it is a perspective. All of history is a perspective. So anybody can have any perspective on it they want. Our perspective is the evolution of consciousness, and how are we going to get up and out of this mess that you folks who were just speaking about the hour before, this whole monetary mess, this whole sickness that we carry because we're disconnected from our true selves and from our connection to the divine. So that's the Scrooby Covenant, which is an essential freedom of conscience statement.
Yeah, would you mind if I actually read that covenant?
The whole thing?
It's very brief.
Okay.
And I think it's profound. So if you'll bear with me, this is the Scrooby Covenant as articulated in the year 1606 in England.
Yeah, as the Lord's free people.
As ye Lord's free people joined themselves by a covenant of the Lord into a church estate, in ye fellowship of ye gospel, to walk in all his ways, made known or to be made known to them, according to their best endeavor, whatever it should cost them, the Lord assisting them. They based their lives on that statement.
Yeah, the Lord's free people. And if you talk to a Native American, you talk to Patricia, this is about freedom, freedom of conscience, true freedom. This thing we call freedom at this point in America, forget it. Okay, and the Native people know that, but it's an evolving process. We just haven't gotten there yet. It's not like it's been a wasted process. It's so important what we've done so far. We just got some choices to make. Now it's up to us, the US, us of A. That's my favorite line. Okay, here, let's move on. Okay, so here we're tracking. Do you want to, can you see that?
Yeah.
Why don't
So
you do that?
the huge shift that occurs at this point in the very early 1600s is literally the shift from monarchy, from essentially a totalitarian, authoritarian form of governance, where a king had all of the power and the king's men were in charge of just enforcing that power, to democracy, where the will of the people became the law and the people became the king. That's an absolutely huge and, of course, treasonous transformation. If you would express those kinds of philosophies and feelings back then, you were gone. You lost your head, literally. So this transition is a huge upward step in the evolution of, certainly of European understanding. It's hard to say perhaps that it's in the evolution of our species as a whole, because our species is divided into all these different groups and ethnic, cultural ways of being.
Right. So can you read this? Because here is basically, I'm going to run down through these dates.
Yeah, do that.
And you can comment if you
Okay.
so desire. So in 1215 we had the Magna Carta. Okay. Do you want to comment on that briefly?
All right. So if you probably all heard of the Magna Carta, it was in what, 1215?
Yeah.
The year 1215, there was a king named John, and he had a group of barons who were under him. So you had your absolute monarch, the king, and you had this group of barons, and the Magna Carta was actually a declaration of independence on the part of the barons, which, in other words, that wasn't for we the people by any means. but it was the first glimmering of a group of people, all of them men, all of them aristocrats, but to say, we have rights as humans. It was the first statement. It didn't last long. It was a very early experiment, and it stands as the first inkling of democracy.
In Western mind. So then we have in around 1290, nobody knows really when the great peacemaker came to the warring tribes of the Iroquois, who had been in war with each other forever and had so much anger and hatred amongst themselves. This great peacemaker came amongst them. It's a wonderfully inspiring, amazing story. I call him a Jesus figure. He came amongst them and he brought them a higher way of thinking. Okay, he changed their way of thinking. He brought the great law. All right, and these people, they realized, many of you know this story, but there was a miracle of sorts that showed the people that he was from the Creator. And as soon as they got that, they're like, OMG, let's listen to this guy. Okay, so Hiawatha became his spokesman because he stuttered, apparently. So Hiawatha
did not stutter.
No, the Daganoweda did.
Right.
So Hiawatha was his spokesman, and Hiawatha was the most angry. He had lost all his family, etc. And he had an instant conversion on the spot, like, oh, okay, this guy is from the Creator, let's go. So this can happen, that we can have instant conversions. We can see the light. We can have an epiphany. Things can change. It doesn't have to take forever. All right. So this is a symbol. This whole story is very symbolic. And so he walks amongst them. He brings the great law. He brings the Iroquois together into the Confederacy. And we won't go into detail on that at this point. But that's just important to see that the Magna Carta, this urge for freedom, this new way of being and seeing was happening, okay, amongst humanity. All right. So then we've got the 1606 Scrooby Covenant. We've got 1620, the Mayflower Compact, which we will go into. We'll go into all this other stuff, but we just wanted to show you a sequence. The Mayflower Compact, which was drafted on the Mayflower, in the cabin of the Mayflower before they landed on American soil. Then we have the 1621, the Pilgrim Wampanoag Treaty. And then we have 1621, the Intercultural Harvest Celebration, known as the First Thanksgiving. And that was a 3-day intercultural celebration. No questions asked about that particular situation as it was described by Edward Winslow in a paragraph. And we have no reason to think that he was making that up or whatever anybody wants to say about it. So then we have the 54 years of peace and friendship in Plymouth that we're calling the first great synthesis. Okay, no matter what your perspective is on who did what to whom and what was going on, and was it 50 years of manipulation, or was it whatever anybody wants from their perspective, the simple fact of the matter is two cultures lived together for 54 years. Whatever the politicians were doing, whatever the leaders were doing, the two visionary leaders, William Bradford and Massasoit, kept their people in peace during their lifetimes. Okay, once they were gone, the next generation took over. There were thousands more people coming in, the dynamics of the whole thing. But meanwhile, Susie and Joe and whatever, all these people were all living together. And there is archaeological evidence now that they were in close association with each other. So the simple fact is that synthesis gave birth to something, which we're calling the American mind, spirit, and democracy, out of that first synthesis. Okay, so then the next thing in this evolution. Yes.
I just want to say that those two cultures who lived together for that half century inevitably profoundly influenced one another. They brought so much to each other. They learned from each other. They traded their poetry, their songs, their music, all those subtle cultural things that are really, really important about in terms of one's actual spirit and how one manifests.
And it's actually called the Plymouth Paradigm.
Yeah.
And we have a little video on YouTube about that. A woman who's written a book called Bradford's Indian Book, showing the influence of the Indians on William Bradford.
On English literature.
On English literature, American literature.
Yeah, exactly.
And called the Plymouth Paradigm. And after everything collapsed, the native people were wishing the Plymouth Paradigm could come back because it was such a time of equality. So then we've got the Albany Plan when
what year was that?
1754.
Mm-hmm.
Ben Frank. So we're moving into the second great synthesis with right now, but we'll go into it more detail. So Ben Franklin's first assignment was to go to the Iroquois to make a treaty talk with the Iroquois because they were wanting to unite the 13 colonies, and they needed to talk with the Iroquois, and they discovered that the Iroquois had this way of uniting different sized tribes and keeping them autonomous. And so Ben Franklin made a proposal in the Albany Plan that wasn't accepted, but it started a whole process of bringing the Iroquois into the discussions for the writing of the Constitution. And this is well known. So there was this influence on the Declaration of Independence of 1776 and the United States Constitution of 1778. So
1787.
1780. Oh, I've got 1778, but 1787.
1787, I believe. I think I'm correct.
Okay, so we'll keep moving. Bill, you can. So, do you want to do a quick run through of this?
Yeah, okay. Let me just.
But just do it quickly.
All right, so this section is entitled New England Before the Mayflower, AD 1000 to 1620. What do we know about New England before the coming of the Mayflower? So we understand that the earliest European contacts may have been, may not have been, but around about in the late 900s, the Vikings showed up, and there is strong evidence that the Vikings actually, while their strongest settlements were probably in Greenland, the Vikings certainly explored the entire eastern seaboard of North America and settled very likely in places as familiar as Cape Cod. There's a carved stone, what do they call those things? A stela or something. Anyway, seems like the Vikings were the first to arrive. They definitely ran into conflict with the locals. There were locals there at that time, and they actually were forced to leave. So we have some of those stories ended up in those sagas, those amazing Scandinavian sagas. Around 1290, we don't know the exact date, but somewhere in the late 1200s, early 1300s, the Iroquois Confederacy comes into being. Between 1500 and 1614, we have a variety of European explorers coming: Verrazano, Cartier, Champlain, Gosnold, John Smith, and a number of others, from whom we have all kinds of reports. There were reports made and accounts of these journeys and these travels and the people they met. And Europeans have this marvelous thing called writing. So they would write these, write and print and publish these accounts. And we still have those original accounts to this day, which is quite a blessing in my belief. 1609, oh, it just went away. 1609 to, now, where did that come from? Okay, there we are. So I'm just reading this and some of it sort of surprising me. No, we need to go forward, Bill. There, thank you. 1609 to 1615, the Massachusetts Confederacy. Now, there was, and few people are aware of this, the most powerful confederation in the Northeast was the Iroquois Confederacy. However, there was another smaller one, less powerful. It was actually tributary to the Iroquois, and that was the Massachusetts, not Massachusetts like the state, but the Massachusetts Confederacy. And it was not 1609 to 1615, so I don't know where those numbers
Okay.
came from. It was way older than that. It actually terminated in 1619 as a result of something called the Tarleton's War, because the Massachusetts people got involved in a conflict that was going on up north to their, actually triggered their demise. 1607 to 1617, the Tarleton's War. How many people have even heard of the Tarleton's War? But if you Google it, you'll find there's a lot of information. I've yet to meet a historian in New England who knows much on the subject. But it was competition for French fur trade between the Micmac, also known as the Tarleton's, and the Penobscot. And then between 1618, in the context of that war, where warriors, seafaring warriors came down from the north on a war mission, I believe delivered an epidemic, and we know that a very serious epidemic occurred between the years 1616 and 1618. That epidemic came down and decimated the coastal tribes, and I believe it was spread by the warriors in that war, but it was a European disease that came from French fur traders to the north.
So this is a significant discovery that Andrew has made. We won't go into it in great detail here, but the fact that the plague that took out the Indians on the eastern seaboard was in fact carried by the Micmacs coming down from the north and bringing this disease with them. And it's a whole complex story that we can tell at some point if someone's interested, and we can make it available. Andrew has written a piece about it, but this is the situation that took out the Native Americans, and it's rumored that the Pilgrims brought smallpox blankets and all this stuff. So the misinformation around this period of time is significant, and the Native people were decimated by a European disease before the Mayflower came, 2 years before the Mayflower came.
The disease ended 2 years before they arrived, right?
Yeah.
So when Squanto, for example, got back to Patuxet, nowadays known as Plymouth, Massachusetts, he discovered that his people were gone, and they had died in a pandemic that had occurred in his absence while he was in Europe. So while he appears to have been kidnapped and taken to Europe, it's amazing in that it saved his life. It preserved him to actually be there to negotiate the treaty with Massasoit. So there's all these sort of providential, extraordinary elements to this tale.
Okay, so here, these are just a few illustrations of stuff we have been talking about. So this is just a lovely illustration of the Great Law of the Iroquois. So you can move along, Bill.
Okay, the Great Law and Democracy.
The Great Law and Democracy. We can make this PowerPoint available to people if they want it. I'm not going to go into this at this point because it's some details about the various houses, the legislative branch, and everything. And guess what? The women were the judicial branch. Okay, the women got to say if they were going to go to war, or not, and if the chiefs weren't doing their job as far as serving the people, then the women got to take them out and bring in somebody else. So it's a very important piece of, that's an important piece that got left out of the Constitution.
That's
People
right.
make that point.
Mm-hmm.
But this slide does show the important, certain important aspects of the Great Law that came into the Constitution. So let's move on to the next one. So here we have the Mayflower carrying the Covenant, and here's the landing on Plymouth Rock.
Which is absolute fantasy, by the way. They would not have been dressed like that, and there is no such thing as Plymouth Rock. They landed on a beach, not a rock. But okay, it's a good story.
Well, yeah, we don't know, but there is the symbol of the rock of the importance and the solidity of the vision that came, so let's move on.
Yeah, not doubting that.
Yeah. And so here we have three significant events.
What are the events, Connie?
The signing the Mayflower Compact. Okay,
That's November into December of 1620 before they landed.
okay. So then we have the Wampanoag Treaty in March of 1621. And then
4 months later, they sat down with the Native Americans and crafted a very simple, basically mutual defense, mutual protection agreement that held for 54 years, which is remarkable.
yeah, and then the harvest celebration in 1621. What's important here is to see that, well, that the treaty was the first meeting of the Pilgrims and the Wampanoag Indians, and that was in March of 1621. They did not know any Indians during that first winter. It's often said that the Indians, they got through the first winter because of the Native Americans, and they didn't meet any Native Americans until the spring of 1621. And so then the Indian corn, they did not know how to plant the Indian corn, and through the treaty and meeting with Squanto, we'll go into that, but Squanto taught them how to plant corn, and then they had a great harvest time in the fall of 1621, and that's when the what we call the first Thanksgiving, this intercultural celebration.
Yeah.
So let's move on.
Are you coming back to the compact?
The compact, yeah. We just want to go into the compact for a minute. This, I'm going to read this because this was what influenced them to write the compact, and it was based on a letter they had from John Robinson, their pastor in Leiden, that he wrote them a letter and said, you know, when you get there, form yourself into a civil body politic. So here's a nice piece. This day, before we come to harbor, observing that some were not well affected to unity and concord, but gave appearance of faction. See, because they weren't landing where they had a patent in Virginia, some of the servants and others said, hey, you know, we're just going to go our own way and we'll do whatever we're going to do. So it was sort of a mutiny kind of thing that was happening. So they said, okay, there was this appearance of faction. It was thought good that there should be an association and agreement so that we should combine together in one body and submit to such government and governors as we should by common consent agree to make and choose. We therefore set our hands to that follows word for word. And that's the Mayflower Compact, which I don't think, I don't have the actual Mayflower Compact in here. But in the Mayflower Compact, it's a simple paragraph that says, we will form ourselves into a civil body politic. We will design equal and just laws that serve the common good. And we will elect officers and officers to put those into effect, and we will swear our obedience. So that's that. So are we running out of time, Stuart?
So can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
We have 10 more minutes.
Okay.
I'm sure you have people who'd love to ask questions.
Okay.
Yeah, should we stop with at least 5 minutes before, Stuart, so we can field a couple of questions?
Well, did I understand that this was going to be a half-an-hour presentation and a half an hour of questions, or was
I
that?
don't know. What was the plan, Con?
I don't know.
Yeah, because this presentation we gave, it took us an hour when we originally did.
Yeah, I thought there was an hour. So anyway, we can just jump through this stuff, and we can just go into the, well, we can let it go now, you know, just because we've touched on the first synthesis and the second synthesis.
So perhaps
the Iroquois Great Law coming into the Constitution is the second great synthesis. And for us, this third great synthesis is us coming together again to bring something extraordinary to humanity
now.
And to us, that's what's going on right here, right now, with what Stuart is bringing the Native Americans into this, honoring in Native ways, and bringing in the 4 directions, and really giving voice to this synthesis. This is, to us, the 3rd great synthesis.
Yeah. So I think we've succeeded in expressing how the so-called Pilgrims and the Native Americans they met came together and lived in harmony for half a century. That's an extraordinary thing, and influenced each other profoundly. And then when the United States of America was at its founding in the 1760s, that the Iroquois Confederacy profoundly influenced, once again, profoundly influenced the settlers who were now Americans, saw themselves as Americans, different from Englishmen, striving for something brand new. And to really recognize and respect and honor the profound influence that, once again, now we just have to know as well that the influence went both ways. So there were superb exchanges of information and culture that helped so much. We hear so much of the Native Americans bringing tobacco or potatoes or whatever, and the Europeans brought so much in other ways. So it was an intercultural exchange. And so Connie's hypothesis here, her question, if I may so frame it, is that we now stand at a moment where, if we can rediscover each other, if we can recognize the positive aspects of our history and look at the potential for unity, intercultural unity among the various tribes of natives, unity among the various tribes of settlers, because this place is so divided into, Germans and Jews and blacks and whites and all these tribal divisions that still pertain. There is the potential for a 3rd synthesis that could be the beginning of something profound and actually be an evolutionary leap in human consciousness.
Yes, and one thing I wanted to say that I've discovered recently is that when William Penn came into Pennsylvania and met with the Delaware Indians, there was a Delaware Indian named Tammany, okay, that met with William Penn, and this relationship, Tammany was such an extraordinary man, and the relationship between them gave birth to a whole organization called the Sons of Tammany, and of Saint Tammany, and it was a whole society of people who recognized the fact that if you were going to be an American, you had to align with the native ways and the native ways of thinking. If you were going to become something other than a European. Okay, so this really supports this whole evolution of the American mind and the
what
synthesis.
years was that, do you know?
That was in the 1700s.
In the mid 1700s?
Yeah. So
Well,
this is a whole thing that's just come on my
plate. It's kind of new to me.
And it's a very important piece, and it actually calls it an American synthesis, which is this Sons of Saint Tammany. They actually made him a saint, and it influenced the Sons of Liberty. It influenced the whole shooting match. And so this 2nd great synthesis is very real, and deserves more attention than we're giving it right now.
And you're saying that was a part of the 2nd synthesis?
Yeah, it's
okay,
huge.
Good.
Huge.
Let's stop it at this point,
Yeah.
because we really are running out of time, and let's see what we can do in terms of,
Okay, I just want to throw one more thing in about the 3rd synthesis, and that is quantum science is now proving, we were talking about Descartes and those guys in the scientific paradigm. Well, quantum science is blowing apart the old scientific paradigm into alignment with the indigenous knowing. Okay, so the Western mind and the indigenous mind are coming together, not only through the climate crisis, but also through quantum physics. And that's very important for people to understand, that the scientific community is now proving what the indigenous peoples know. They just can't prove the heart and the spirit of it, which the native people are bringing is the spirit and the love and the heart of it all. So We'll end it there.
Thank you. We have Richard Kotlar's Bill. If you can unmute Richard, has been chomping at the bit to ask a question or offer an observation. Richard, are you there? Bill, can you unmute Richard?
He's not muted. And it looks like he might have stepped away.
Let me see if I can get him on my phone here.
Yeah, there might be a local problem with his workstation at this point.
While you're trying to get hold of Richard, I'll go on ahead and ask, with William Penn and the Delaware people, how did you spell the chimney, or was it Tammany?
With a
T
T.
is in Tom. A-M.
Tammany.
Tammany.
Tammany. Am I right?
Yeah.
Yes, Tammany.
Right.
Yeah, so you can Google it, and I can send you a couple of important articles that I found. But if you look the American Syntheses and Tammany, you'll find this this whole report on it, and there's a couple of other ones. It's really fascinating, and I had no idea when I came up with these first synthesis, the first synthesis, the second synthesis, all that. I had no idea that there was all this St. Tammany stuff and synthesis stuff around this period of time down with the Delaware Indians and down in Pennsylvania, because things in New England fell apart. We didn't go into King Philip's War. The native people declared war on the settlers, and things went into a bloody, horrible war. So things in New England disintegrated to a very large degree, and but this whole thing in Pennsylvania came forth. So it's 100 years later.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's
So Richard, go ahead and ask your question, Richard.
Can anybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Can Connie and Andrew hear me?
yes.
We can, Richard.
Okay, I'd sure like to be able to hear them so I can hear them. Try to have a conversation one way.
Richard, this is the only way we can do it, and Patricia is going to begin in a few minutes, so please be to the point.
Okay, well, I want to thank Connie and Andrew for the discussion and finding it all very fascinating. The one panel that they put up that interests me above all, in particular, was the panel about the Great Separation that occurred in the 1600s. It's actually something that in my own work I've been wondering about myself, but in a different aspect. Well, anyway, before the 1600s, if people had issue, and the society had some sort of issue to resolve, it could be an issue between people, like a theft issue or a murder issue or some sort of injury or possession issue or whatever, or issues with the law, whether a person was, violating a law or not, and what should be done about it. They would meet, there's some sort of council of the wisest and most venerable people in society would be called to hear the matter. Usually some council of elders, as I understand it, who would sit and they would hear the story of the people at issue, and they would decide, they would seek, and their judgment and their criteria would be to seek the highest truth on the matter, taking all things divine and secular into consideration. After the 1600s, especially after the time of John Calvin, that changed dramatically. Now truth was sought not through the council of the elders, but in the courts. And it was, and now somebody had a problem. They would go to the courts under some sort of judge who was backed up by some sort of apparatus enforcement, barred jails and men with swords, guns, or whatever, and they would issue some sort of edict, and then that edict would be forced on the people in dispute. And they would no longer just, and if there was some wiser counsel around that thought that was a miscarriage, nobody really listened to them. So we went from resolving the issues in society by seeking truth, and the eldest and wisest in society, to going to the courts, and it became it was no longer truth by it was no longer resolution by truth, but it was resolution by contract. The sanctity of God, the sanctity of the elders, was replaced by the sanctity of the contract. Now, say a man was caught stealing food because he's feeding his starving family, well, among the council and the elders, they stood a good chance of seeing the predicament of this man and seeing the higher good and the higher law that he was serving. But in a court of law, with the sanctities of contract, he would say, well, did you steal the bread? Yeah, I stole it. Well, you're guilty. You're sentenced to this or that, and that was it. And that was a big change, and that changed everything society. I had a friend back at the Michigan State University who was a lawyer, and she said we went from a period of what she called justice by truth to justice by combat. And I think that was a huge division that manifested, perhaps was even more important than the separation between science and the sacred. I don't know, that's a big statement, so I'm not sure about that, but it was like on that order that manifested in that time. I just wanted to say that, and I'll have to take it some other time later, but I wanted to hear Connie and Andrew comment on that. It's been part of my work lately that question's been alive, and I'd very much like to hear what they have to say about it. So that was it, Stuart. Thank you.
So let's pick up this thread then later, because I do want to honor Patricia, who's with us, and I think it's important that she will be following up on this fine presentation that Connie and Andrew have presented.
We can either do it another day. I just want to do it before.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting.
If possible.
Yes, thank you, Richard.
It's very interesting.
Thank you.
Good. So
Thanks to everybody.
Connie and Andrew, thank you for bringing us a deeper appreciation for a part of our history that we haven't heard. It's become very politicized, and in this Thanksgiving tide, I think your message is really a key one. So thank you both for the work you've done over these decades, and I'm very glad that Patricia now follows up.
Yeah.
Are you with us, Patricia?
I'm here.
Good, good. So Patricia, as we know, there were challenges last night with the visuals, and she has much to offer that she wasn't able to address. So she was going to pick up the thread at the end of these evenings ahead of us, beginning tonight. We see a picture of you, Patricia, in front of us now.
Yes, I would like to pick up on this note of the importance of justice. And A Course in Miracles defines justice as love. So I was grateful to hear that common thread throughout tonight of the first presentation and the second one. And so I would also like to read what the Dalai Lama says about love. People were created to be loved, and things were created to be used. And the reason why the world is in chaos is because things are being loved and people are being used. And so yesterday, I felt that I mentioned that ceremonial chanting is not the same as melody, European melody singing. And the vibration of the words are to cut through and to cleanse and purify for balance, harmony, and for peacemaking. And as I consider myself a conduit for teaching peacemaking, leadership and peacemaking, the language and techniques of peacemaking, I found myself in a collective wailing. That's how it came through, and I thought, wow, this is not me. This is the collective wailing of my tribal people through the spiritual realms, the ancestral realms. And so I would like to take one or two questions and just pick up from where I was last night. I did mention, and we could go to this illustration of conflict of interest, because our whole theme here has to do with a conflict of interest. And I so appreciate everyone's contribution toward the unifying principles, because that is our future collective survival. And so I said the root cause, can everyone see the screen?
Yes.
The root cause in all conflicts is religion, politics, finance, social, is what I call conflicts of interest, because dualism would divide us. So I simplified it yesterday, and I said we have the choice that everything is energy, and we can qualify energy or we can disqualify it. And so there's a comparison here. So I hear people talking about individualism and how individualism then became power, conquest and power over, and so on. I spoke in great detail last night. And then qualifying energy is redeeming the energy. And so my understanding of all of what I'm hearing from the first, second, and third synthesis just presented is that we are remembering and reawakening to our individuality within the whole, the reciprocal assimilation of cultural values between the indigenous people and the European pilgrims. And so we can move out of this back to the 4 phases of conquest. And from there, I will just describe the indigenous ceremonial change process next, and we'll go back to the chart. I had taken people through this in somewhat detail without this chart. And when we get to number 3, domestication, what that instilled in people and why, what is the obstacle for healing is the transgenerational unresolved anger. So that means that it's carried from one generation to another and it's unresolved, and also it's displaced upon someone in proximity. And so that can take the form of racism and what we're seeing today in contemporary times where people are fighting each other and killing each other, and how are we going to heal from this in order to cleanse and purify. So that is the purpose of an indigenous ceremonial change process. I called it Renaissance last night. Well, the translation is wellness restoration. So what does it mean? And everything that I hear in this third synthesis is exactly following a ceremonial change process, in the sense that each person has their part to contribute toward unifying in their intention and in their action to bring to fruition and to bring into manifestation what is being described as a third synthesis. So we'll go back to the chart and I'm going to describe it. If you'll bring up the chart for me, this It's a visual, it's a chart. This one, okay, we were looking at only this one yesterday. And so we see a shaded area that leads to this 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And so throughout this week, I'd like to take 30 minutes after each evening and let people ask questions, because there wasn't time for questions yesterday. I had talked about the empire folly of the reframing our thinking, which is existing within our own choice, a decision to say what we say yes and no to. And thus far we have, the bottom of the chart illustrates that we have been saying yes to win, lose, and nobody wins, and destructive and death producing choices. And you'll see that it starts with confusion and doubt and fear for survival and hunger and poverty, disease, and early death, which is, of course, the warring that is going on this planet. And so the Indigenous ceremonial change process is naming an out of balance condition. So every presenter in some way is naming what is out of balance, and especially the form of money system. Everything is energy, so that the money system is out of balance and was intentionally put out of balance. And it is intentionally being planned to perpetuate this out of balance in order for the resource go from the poor to the rich every generation. And so identifying root causes, that's my understanding of this conference, and the willingness and the interest and the commitment to listen to one another and learn from one another in order to identify those root causes. And the root cause that is the overarching leverage point for planetary cosmic is, instead of the resource going from poor to the rich every generation, from the bottom to the top, that through this sequencing of naming all the out of balance conditions and identifying the root cause from every domain, and then the cleansing, purification, the undoing, the dismantling is the emptying. It is looking at examining unexamined assumptions about how we understand and define reality. Then the reframing. So last night I was approaching that reframing, and that reframing does require. So when I hear the phrases that we must, every person realize, a self-realization that we have the capacity within us to choose a creative solution, and that we can unify in our creative solution, and then we can bring that to fruition and to manifestation. So that's what I'm calling a sequencing. I wish I could describe it in the Navajo language, because that's where it came from. In all ceremonies, when a person is on this pathway, on the chart that says natural order, the name of the pathway and interpreting it is that any time in life, from child to an adult, from a child to youth to an adult to elder, any time in life a person can choose to remember and reawaken. So we are there as humanity. The whole planet then is in a place of crisis to choose differently, and we are in the portal. And so this is a reframe process, meaning that we will use our capacity for our conscience to access moral reasoning, in which then to design those creative solutions. And I do hope that the conversation where it left off this evening about synthesis can be also further explored, because I see people's faces and their interest in continuing in that way. So I'm going to open up for questions now. And there were a lot more people yesterday that may have wanted to ask questions, but I will take a few questions.
Thank you, Patricia.
Is there just only me and you, Stuart?
I'm here. It's Andrea. Hi.
And I'm
Well,
here. Connie's here.
And
Yeah,
Brad's on the phone.
yeah. Was that you, Brad, that was asking those last questions?
Yes.
Can you articulate that in the context of what I'm speaking about, and we could link this and make a connection? Because this is exactly what we're talking about. And what I was doing yesterday was not talking about this process. I was guiding people through the process itself for people to experience within themselves this process. Would you like to articulate it?
Well, when I try to apply what I hear you asking us to do when we're confronted with problems is to try to allow some creativity in the reframing of looking at everything, and reestablishing our sacred relation to all our relations. We come on to some new considerations with our created economic or almost imaginary money community. That there is a consideration where money becomes not just a figment of imagination, but a great trust between a community. But for some people, that's a figment of their imagination if they don't trust their community. But what I've heard you saying has caused me to look at money and this consideration tonight of access for monetary funds from our own government or our cultural communities' support, where money becomes more available so more folks can do things that they choose to do with it and improve the community. And it made me wonder a little bit. I guess what was strange was money always seemed to live in the economy world, and the way Camilla spoke about it tonight, he allowed it to be part of the political, the realm of the rights community.
Yes, exactly. That's what he's calling the commonwealth. And that's what the commonwealth is, what this country started out with. And then that's what is the creative solution for our collective survival, because the term money doesn't have to come from the bank, because it is energy, and it's an exchange of energy. And yet, if natural resources like water and air and electricity and food are hoarded, then there's a win-win on only the elite, and there's a lose-lose on the people of color, the indigenous people, whose land and resources are being used to perpetuate a system of inequality. And so I'm specifically using the word reframe to denote, to connotate, to describe the actual yes to a decision of conversation of how to win. How do I win? You win, and other people win with their genius and their gift to design the creative solutions for our collective survival. Does that make sense?
Well, you made me realize that it was possible that whenever we invest in our savings in a bank and the bank makes use of the money somehow or other, that we have a cultural environment. It is governmentally regulated, but they can make notes for the local community of monetary values. I don't.
Well,
I'm.
The way the bank debt system is that the banks never had any money. They don't have money. They created money by creating debt. So they got money from other people and used their money, and then they got interest, and that interest is profit. So that's a fundamental, the foundation is faulty because it originated and perpetuates the inequality of distribution of so-called wealth and what is false wealth and what is real wealth and so on. And so I hear the I can't pronounce his name. Is he called Harmony? I heard him speak in the way that is restoring the equal distribution of wealth by changing our thinking and our wording and using the commonwealth for what it's for. When we say money, we think that we're not in charge of it and that we're just bondage and slavery to the banking system, to the international banking system, who are actually the front for the Illuminati. Illuminati, naughty.
Richard, are you back on? Can you hear this? Richard, are you with us?
I took a lot of notes of his presentation, and it's the words that we use, that we create. What we have done is we've taken the natural order law that govern all of us equally. We've taken that and made it unreal. And then we've made this false world and all the terminology and the context for it. Myself, I make a distinction, I said last night, between economics and financial. I just use financial for money system, banking system, and so on, credit, loan, interest. But I use the word economy to refer to the commonwealth. That's the kind of distinction I make in order to have a clear understanding about what it is I'm talking about. And so from a spiritual lens, it is the money changers and interests that put us in bondage and slavery, and it's actually spiritually, morally, ethically inhumane say, I own these resources, and for me to give it to you, to loan it to you on a temporary basis, that you have to pay me back more than what I loaned you, because that's incongruent. That's a double bind. And that double bind takes the form of say one thing and do another thing, and it's incongruent. And so that's kind of the crazy making with just language itself. So it's my intention to inform and clarify in such a way to assist and to inspire and to motivate the how-to. There's a way to this peacemaking and this humaneness. Is that clear to this to the people that are listening right now?
Crystal clear, Patricia, crystal clear.
And so it's about 2 minutes before my 30 minutes are up tonight, and we can continue this every night.
Yes.
Because it is a process, and we can take one question or two questions when we have time. And Brad, I wanted to hear you articulate the question to Connie again in the context of this unifying principles of spiritually awake people.
So that was actually Richard Kotlar's.
Okay, it was his question. I don't know why I thought it was yours, Brad. I think of you that you're so smart, that's why. And you must have asked a really astute question, and it got delayed. And I was wanting to see if we, and that's why you're calling for Richard, so that we could see to make this link and we could put into practice what Connie and Andrew and myself and everyone is talking about. We're doing it, we're experiencing it, we're putting it into our conversation and our dialogue instead of just talking about it. That was my intention for participating and doing my part and contributing the life work that I have organized in this community of practice. So we're at 8:30, and we can do this tomorrow night, the last 30 minutes, and I will stop here.
I think it's a very nice way to bring this, particularly this consideration, Patricia, with us to end our day and to bring it into our sleep. You're speaking, in other words, in my mind at least, to the great synthesis.
Yes, this is the preparation for this third synthesis. That is wellness restoration. That is giving up the lies and the blame and the violence and the war and forever polarizing into adversary and conflict. It is saying, oh, I'm born a peacemaker. Oh, my brain is built in for saying yes to what is constructive and life affirming. Oh, that's who I really am. That's my identity. And instead of justice doesn't mean just ice in their heart of the 1%, or just us.
Right, right.
This economic justice is love, and love is the eloquent solution. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much, Patricia. We'll continue tomorrow night. Friends, I'd like to read the verse that we began with. It's brief, but with heartfelt thanks to Carmina, to Connie and Andrew, and now Patricia. We wrap up our second evening, Monday evening. These words from friend Rudolf Steiner read, "May our feelings penetrate into the center of our hearts, and seek in love to unite themselves with human beings seeking the same goal, with spirit beings who bearing grace, strengthening us from realms of light and illuminating our love, are gazing down upon our earnest, heartfelt striving. Thank you, one and all,